Hello, my name is Elyse Keefe, and I'm the Road Safety Project Coordinator at the University of North Carolina's Injury Prevention Research Center. So this presentation is on the use of the Community Readiness Assessment tool for use for Vision Zero or other kind of similar road safety initiatives. Very briefly, the Community Readiness Assessment is essentially a really low resource tool to get kind of a quick pulse check on the readiness of your community to tackle a particular issue, in this case, road safety, by conducting a limited number of brief key informant interviews. So this assessment tool has been used successfully to inform strategic actions for solving a number of social and health problems. So just to get started, I'm going to give kind of a quick overview of Vision Zero and the role of the Safe Systems approach to achieving that goal of zero deaths on our transportation network. And then next, I'll give some background on the development, purpose, and benefits of the community readiness model and assessment tool, and explain what the steps for actually carrying out this assessment in your community would be. And then finally, for any communities that are located in North Carolina and are interested in Vision Zero, our team offers some significant student support for completing these assessments. So I'll talk a little bit about that process. Okay, so to begin with, kind of a refresher, but Vision Zero is an initiative that originally began in Sweden in the 90s, and it seeks to eliminate road deaths and serious injuries. So it begins from that moral imperative that these deaths are unacceptable, but also preventable. So we have to take steps to do so and make that a priority when we're making any decisions that affect transportation. So Vision Zero really gained in popularity in the US since about 2014. Many communities across the country began recognizing that, not only are we losing about 40,000 people a year on our roads, these are friends, neighbors, family members, we've also been moving in the wrong direction. And those numbers have been growing in recent years. So, our traditional strategies are not working, right? So motor vehicle deaths persistently remain a leading cause of death for all age groups, but in particular for children and young adults. So we're not doing the right things to prevent them. So Vision Zero represents a paradigm shift. And so instead of, doubling down on what we've already tried for all these years, often what's referred to as the E's, so engineering, enforcement, education, and sometimes a few others that get tacked on there. Instead, the underlying approach to Vision Zero is what's called a safe systems approach. Most pertinent to the topic of this presentation is that the safe systems approach suggests that in order to actually get to that zero deaths, the responsibility for road safety has to be shared with system designers as well as policymakers. So the system designers, right? So this is an important move away from putting the responsibility of road safety solely on the road users themselves, essentially expecting them, enforcing them, trying to educate them to behave perfectly, because we know that everyone makes mistakes. So instead, we have to actually account for those mistakes in a variety of ways. And then we also know that this shared responsibility can't really be done without full collaboration across many sectors, or without a certain degree of some public support. So the community readiness model and assessment tool was developed by research practitioners at the Tri-Ethnic Center at Colorado State University in the 90s. And they were really looking to fill a gap in the research for community-based interventions, and also looking to develop a really practical, applicable tool that could be used by practitioners, people in the fields, as well as community members without extensive resources. So the developers of the tool at the time, as I mentioned, they were focused on community-based interventions, especially substance use prevention programs. And they would notice that, the same intervention, something like a media campaign, works great in this one community, and then it totally fails or falls flat in another, right? Within community development research at the time, they'd also started to recognize that, since every community is unique, they have different needs, different levels of need, certain types of support are more likely to be successful. depending on local factors. So within that field of research, they had started, understanding and identifying different stages of implementation that a community is going to move through. And then something kind of similar was seen at the time at kind of the individual level within the field of psychology. So therapists and counselors, they might be working to help clients quit smoking, for example, and were, realizing they had to adapt their methods based on what they actually termed personal readiness. So, of course, someone in denial that smoking is a problem for their health, they need different support, a different approach than someone who, knows their smoking is a problem, is motivated to change their behavior. They're going to need different strategies and a different approach. But, right, the first person needs to, have some holes poked in their logic, even realize that it is a problem. Whereas the person who wants to quit, they need some real strategies for replacing, those urges and things. So based on these two theories that emerged in the 80s and 90s, the team developed and tested what they called the community readiness model. So if you want to learn more about the development of that model, how it was tested for validity and reliability and everything, that is all in the manual. I'll be sure to link that at the end. But essentially, community readiness, it's just the degree to which a community is willing and prepared to take action on a problem. And so the community readiness assessment tool is used to actually gauge or measure that level of readiness at the community level. So it's been accepted as an essential element in prevention programming. And our team has adapted this tool for use in road violence prevention, specifically for Vision Zero. And so there are 4 premises to the community readiness assessment. Number 1, readiness is issue specific. So that means that a community might be at a really high level of readiness to deal with one problem, say opioid overdoses, but they're at a low level of readiness for another problem, suicide prevention, for example. So it's specific to the issue, to the problem. Number 2, the stage of readiness can accurately be assessed. Number 3, that community readiness can be increased. And that, of course, gets at the purpose of the assessment. So you want to increase that readiness. That's going to increase the likelihood that your community is going to be able to solve that particular problem. And then number 4, that determining a community stage of readiness is essential because actionable strategies are informed by that level of readiness. So if an intervention is not consistent with a community's current stage, it's probably going to fail, or you're going to be wasting resources, spinning your wheels. So basically, it helps you kind of identify where you actually need to prioritize resources at any given time. So for our purposes, we of course want to find out the level of readiness to address road fatalities and serious injuries through the implementation of a Vision Zero or safe systems sort of approach or initiative. So the community readiness assessment proposes that there are 9 stages of readiness. So as I was saying, determining what stage in the process your community is at, that's going to point you to where to focus your efforts. So at these lower stages, which are actually at the top, so that no awareness, denial, resistance, vague awareness, there is simply not a lot of awareness of the problem or that it's a problem. Efforts are probably not quite organized yet. So in Vision Zero, that might look like, there's just a few people in the community that are concerned by deaths on the roads locally, but otherwise, leadership, community members, they're not aware of the trends or prevalence or don't acknowledge that it's a problem. Then moving into some of the middle stages, the pieces are maybe starting to come together. So leadership's becoming more involved, more concerned. The community is becoming more aware, more motivated to address the problem. So in Vision Zero, that might mean that there's some growing support for actions to reduce serious and fatal crashes. Maybe some leaders and key stakeholders have started working on a formal plan and meeting and discussing next steps. And then in the last few stages, kind of 7, 8, 9 here, the efforts have become more established. The community is supportive and knowledgeable about efforts, and are maybe even looking to expand efforts in supportive of that. Eventually, you want the community to actually take ownership of the initiative, and potentially even take on new issues. So, big picture, the community readiness model is going to measure the attitudes, efforts, and activities, as well as the knowledge and resources of both the community members and local leadership to assess those levels of readiness across 6 different dimensions. And I'll get into those in a moment. So some of the benefits for using the community readiness model and assessment tool is that it's really going to help identify where to actually focus your efforts at a given time point. So, we're all working with limited resources. And so this is going to give you some insights specific to your community about, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, and that'll help you decide where to actually make some investments. It also provides some guidance and helps to identify actions specific to your community's readiness level, and takes into account the culture of your community as well. And then finally, it provides opportunities to grow relationships through the conversations to better understand and collaborate with leaders and key organizations in your community. And that's just by nature of how it's done, by conducting these interviews with leaders. So some other reasons to use the model. It's really going to help you identify some barriers early on to help better prepare for them. Again, by indicating where you're going to invest your resources, it's going to conserve what you've got, right? You're not going to be wasting time, money, energy, etc. It's also really a pretty efficient, inexpensive, and easy to use tool, especially when we think about these kind of community-wide surveys and things, hosting these events. Those can really become pretty costly and extensive, and so this is a pretty easy and expensive way to really gauge things locally. It also promotes community ownership. It leans on local knowledge and local experts instead of paying consultants and outside groups and things to do this. Of course, road fatalities, it's a complex problem, right? Understanding how to address it, what's next, where do we put our resources, gets really overwhelming. And this tool, it really breaks down the problem and breaks it into some more manageable next steps that you can feel confident are going to support your overall goal. And then finally, it creates a community vision for change, right? Even just simply by starting the conversation, starts to shape that. Okay, so I mentioned there are 6 dimensions. So each of those 9 stages of readiness are actually measured across the 6 dimensions. So they might not be, the stages of readiness might not be the exact same across these different dimensions. So the first one measured is community efforts. This is really going to assess the knowledge of the people you're interviewing. So some key stakeholders. So they should be well-informed, well-connected people. And you're gauging, what it is that they know about local Vision Zero efforts. Second is community knowledge of the efforts. And so here you're kind of finding out more what the community at large might know about efforts. Obviously, it's from the perspective of the person you're talking to, but ideally you're talking to people that have a good pulse on the community, or at least a certain segment of the community. So that's what helps make that reliable, and they can likely speak to the status of that more general knowledge, at least for a subset of the community or a particular sector. The third dimension here, of course, you want to find out, where does leadership stand as far as their support and buy-in for an initiative and the strategies involved in a Vision Zero initiative. And that's both, formal elected official leadership, but also informal, right? You probably have some informal leaders and trusted people within your community that you also want to be talking to and thinking about. The fourth one here is community climate. So this assesses more the general attitude towards Vision Zero. Where are people's priorities in the community? What do they think about the causes of death on the roads? What do they think are some effective solutions? How well do those align with Vision Zero and Safe Systems approach? Number 5 is community knowledge about the issue. So are people in the community, are they aware of the prevalence, trends, common factors, more dangerous areas, and kind of underlying root causes of road violence locally? And then finally, resources. So what does the community have at its disposal for addressing road fatalities? And this is not just financial, this is, of course, also people, time, skills, meeting space, and so forth. So this is just an example, but after each interview, the response is going to be given a quantitative readiness score for each of those 6 dimensions by using an anchored rating scale that's provided in the interview guide. So key here is that you really want to increase the readiness across the dimensions at a similar pace. And that's going to increase the likelihood of success of your initiative. So, for example, in the case shown here, you have high levels of stakeholder knowledge of the efforts. You've got some decent support from leadership, and there have been some resources dedicated to the problem or known to be available by the people that were interviewed. However, the community only has some vague awareness of efforts and knowledge about the program, about the problem, and the community climate is not super supportive. So this really indicates that you want to leverage, whatever's working in these other areas to really bring the community better up to speed, right? So what does leadership know that the community at large doesn't know? And so the interviews are also going to hopefully give you some more rich data, some more, specific information that's going to inform, what types of messaging are well received in this community, in your community specifically. Who and what organizations are most trusted? Who would be the best communities to engage with? Organizations to engage with that could communicate and spread that message. All right, so in order to complete an assessment, you'll need the Community Readiness Assessment Manual. And so we have adapted this for Vision Zero. It's available on the CSCRS Resource Hubs page, and I'll include that link at the end. And they'll also be accessible in the slide deck, which I'll provide. So this manual includes everything you need to conduct the assessment. It's got email templates for inviting participants, all the information pretty much that I've covered in this presentation. It has the actual script for conducting the interviews and a place to actually record notes and score those interviews. So cover to cover, the manual is, it's less than 30 pages. So it's not too long. Number 2, you'll need the interview guide and scoring sheet. So this file is linked in the manual. This is where you'll find the complete script for conducting those interviews. It's even programmed to calculate those average scores of the interviews on the final sheet of the Excel document. And number 3, you'll of course need some people to interview. So there's some guidance in the manual for selecting them. But we also recommend using the partnership assessment tool. This is also found on that CSCRS resource hubs page that I'll link at the end. And that's especially useful if you're kind of using this tool to simultaneously grow your coalition, right? Start identifying, making connections and relationships with some groups, organizations, folks you haven't maybe worked with in the past on this problem. So the assessment tool is, yeah, just a great way to make some new connections in your community, find out where those, where your priorities are maybe overlapping. And then finally, you're going to need some dedicated time. So you'll need at least a few hours to prepare for the interviews, invite and schedule them, read up on the manual. The interviews themselves take about 30 minutes to an hour each. And then we've heard from people it's helpful to save a little bit of time after each interview to kind of review your notes and score them when it's kind of fresh in your mind. Again, compared to a big community-wide survey, this really can be a low resource option and provide some really valuable information and connections to people who decide to complete it. All right, so how do you conduct the assessment? Step one is you identify your issue. This is kind of already done in this case in our adapted version of this manual for Vision Zero, with a focus on the problem of road deaths and serious injuries. Step two is to identify your community. This is often also kind of already a given for most Vision Zero initiatives. They are, within a city or a specific town, but there are some larger regional and state initiatives, in which case I might suggest a few more contacts, adding a few more interviews. Step three, you want to prepare for those interviews by reviewing the manual and the interview guide. Step four, you identify and invite your 6 to 8 key contacts. You might want to start by reaching out to 10 or 12 to start, just in case a few decline or have some scheduling conflicts. So the manual has some guidance on how to select these, but ideally you want to hear from a diversity of sectors and kind of subsets of your community to gain those different perspectives and kind of understand a more holistic picture of your community's level of readiness, because these are going to be averaged across the different interviews. So yeah, again, that partnership assessment tool might be useful for this as well. So for any communities working on growing their coalitions, I think I've mentioned this, it's a good opportunity to reach out and actually yourself better understand some of those sectors that haven't been involved, but may need to be at the table. So on the right-hand side, you can see those 6 sectors that are suggested in the manual. I think this works well for the transportation issues. We didn't really change this. We have some suggestions for each of those categories specific to Vision Zero. So for involved citizens, we often suggest talking to, bike ped advocates. For law, talk to traffic enforcement, police departments, safe routes to school coordinators for the education sector. And step 5, you actually conduct the interviews. So again, we've got a script, a whole set of questions for each of those 6 dimensions. You can do those in person, but of course, if you use Zoom or another video conferencing software, you can record and actually save that transcript, which can be helpful. Step 6, you score those interviews, again, best done immediately following an interview when it's fresh in your mind. And there's an anchored rating scale. So you kind of just read through the prompts and select the one that best fits your takeaways from that interview, from what that person was saying. And that response will correspond to a number, and you just kind of plug that in as the score for that dimension for that interview, and then it averages them across all the interviews. at the end for each of the 6 dimensions. And then finally, step 7. So you use these scores to actually refer to the manual for guidance on strategic next steps for each of those readiness levels. Again, kind of keeping in mind you want to increase readiness across those dimensions at a similar pace. So especially targeting some of those lower dimensions, whatever strategies correspond with those. And the manual actually includes, general guidance, but also has some more specific suggested activities for increasing that readiness. And they're described in a way that, you can adapt for your own community and for some of the more specific relevant things that came out of the interviews that are specific to your community. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to go over is just describe the support that our team at UNC is willing to provide for communities in North Carolina that are interested in Vision Zero. So since about 2020, we've been working with some excellent graduate students from a few different departments here at UNC to actually help communities in North Carolina carry out these assessments. So we strongly encourage communities to carry these out themselves, but we understand, people are under time constraints. So we are continuing to offer student support for completing essentially 5 of the 7 steps that you see checked here. So again, issue and community, kind of a given. Next, it's going to be the students that familiarize themselves with the materials to prepare to actually conduct the interviews. They carry out the interviews and score them. For those steps, our main ask of the communities and their representatives is that they meet with our team to identify who should be invited and request that you all send that initial invitation to those key informants. And this is, primarily because you're probably in a better position to actually recruit and get a response from that person, but it still offers you the opportunity also to kind of make that connection with that person. And then our students will also complete a report of the interviews that include specific and tailored recommendations. And then, of course, it's your role to actually take action on those recommendations. So that is all that I have for you today. If you have any questions about using this assessment tool for Vision Zero or anything I've covered in the presentation, please email me and reach out to me. And you can find a link to these assessment materials at the CSCRS website linked below. Thank you very much.